on the, oh, it says wind.
How about planning board? You see that one?
I forgot.
Good afternoon, 4:30. We've got a busy agenda, and I know a lot of folks have conflicting meetings, so I want to get underway. And first of all, first item on the agenda is, did we receive any correspondence? And I did get an email today via the committee website from the Green Center, and they had some comment on something that's on tonight's agenda. So just acknowledging they did send an email relative to things on the watershed plans tonight and watershed plans in general. I'm also, as chair, going to adjust the agenda. In reading my authority, I find I can adjust the order of the agenda, and in the interest of getting to number 3 and getting one of the presenters off to the CONCOM meetings, because he's wearing a lot of hats, we're going to do number 3, discussion of the Mass Winds Act and an associated act that are from different parts of the legislature. So, Dan, if you're ready, introduce yourself and tell us what you got.
Yep. For the record, Dan Walsh, East Falmouth, and I am on the Conservation Commission at the moment. So in discussions around legislation that could impact the requirements for the watershed, I tried to do a bunch of research to try to understand what was going on today. And I know there's been some discussion about a couple of the bills that are going through the Mass legislature. So there's 2 of them that are there today. The Mass Winds Act, which is, as this says, it's really the economic development bill. And from the perspective, let me put this in slideshow mode. From the perspective of, if you're communicating with anybody, the numbers that are underneath there show you the House and the Senate version because they're not yet law. So you really, if you're going to write your congressperson to try to express your concerns for these things, you want to use the numbers. But so let's just go through what's going on. So I've got one slide on the Winds Act. In summary, what it does is it provides the by right 2-family housing on all residential lots. So to the extent that that could affect the calculations that everything's being done for the watersheds to determine what the load on the systems could be, it's significant. It does go on to say within the regulations that while allowing it, it's still going to require reasonable limitations on the permits. And their definition of reasonableness, what's outlined here, those are literally their words right from the legislature. But the bottom line is, if you summarize it, what it says is they're going to have to meet the requirements in this specific example for Title V. So in that case, they would have to do denitrification systems, but it's still going to increase the load on any properties in the watershed if you double the amount of septic systems that are there. So I'll move on to the other act, but the point being, if you're concerned by that, it's write your legislator. And there's a slide at the end as to who they are and how to contact them when I get there. So the other one is the Mass Ready Act. The Act is really the environmental bond. And if you follow these, both of these bills are, generally speaking, annual bills. They come up, they fund either business development or environmental development, most of which is infrastructure development. But they title them different things because they try to focus on specific issues. Again, in this case, the numbers are different because they're in different places. In both cases, the requirements that create the problems are in the Senate versions of the bills, not in the House versions of the bills. So if you really, as you get into it, you really want to reference the Senate version and mostly focus on our local senators. So the Mass Ready Act, the positive side of it, bond bill, there's $3 billion in it. There's a lot of money there, a lot of money that Falmouth would be seeking grants to get for coastal resiliency and a whole bunch of other infrastructure-related things. So it's good in that respect. It's not entirely bad. It just has other issues in it, which are, it allows priority housing to circumvent all the wastewater bylaws. And that's obviously going to create another problem. So clearly it's something that myself, I would assume everybody here, all the people who are environmentalists, conservationists, would really want out of the bill. I can go through this. Anyways, this is the status today. So in the case of this bill, it's passed the Senate, it's passed the House, it's in conference. There was a letter written by all of these conservation groups collectively and sent to the Senate and the House to try to get changes made to the Mass Ready Act. And this is really the summary of what it said, which is fundamentally trying to fix all the sections. It's unfortunately, in this bill, it's not one section. It's more complicated. It's in a bunch of different places. But you can, if you want to read to understand what it is, I've got links on the subsequent slide that'll let you go read the letter that was written and all the details behind it so that you could kind of formulate a letter yourself. The bottom line is the way the legislature works is the more people they hear from, the more likely they're going to listen. So I know a lot of people in conservation have written letters. I'm just bringing it to your attention because it would be helpful if you, again, considered yourself writing letters. And I literally mean individually, because collectively, sure, they can look at this group, but you guys don't vote as a group when it comes to what they do. You vote individually. So letters are helpful referencing that you're on this board, and what your real concern is with these things is going to be more influence on getting them to consider changing the act than anything else. So let me go on. I think I mostly said that. Here's the local people. Again, you guys probably know all of these people anyways. If you want the background data, here's where you can kind of get the background data, and you can just read it, so I won't read it for you, but the references are all there for you to reach out, get their contacts, their emails, and so forth. Of course, actually, I think their emails are right there, so the data's there. Now, you guys all have the complete presentation. There's another 20 slides if you want all of the details that are in here after this one. But in summary, that's kind of the two bills and the concerns that I just asked you guys would think about and consider writing to these guys to express your concerns. That's it.
Okay, one question I have right off the top of my head is, any idea of when it might come out of joint conference?
So, from what I understand from reading what they say online is they're all trying to get these things done and in place so they can pass them in January.
Because right now, the legislature is not in session,
Right.
and won't be until September.
Right, that's right. So but the process, as far as I can tell, there's not a lot of information they'll provide you on schedule. Right. The only thing they'll tell you is what their goal is, which is to get them in place by January 5th is their objective. If you really think about it, what they're trying to do is they're trying to release funding for that these things support. One's jobs development, one's infrastructure development. They don't want to delay the release of the funds. So they're trying to get the bills done. So you really want to catch them as early as possible to try to get them to consider changes. Now, I've submitted information to all of these people. I've gotten phone calls back from one of them who's very interested in trying to better understand, right, our local senator. So Fernandez has called me back and whatnot. So I've gone through it with him, but or his chief of staff.
What was his response?
It was mostly trying to listen and understand what the problems were. He understands. The bottom line is all of these things have the potential to create a whole lot of extra cost, which means a whole lot of extra tax burden, and that's not what anybody wants. So they get it. They're just trying to connect the dots in a way that you can figure out how to then address it. Right? And as this group goes, what I've proposed is the easiest way to do it is exclude nitrogen-sensitive areas from the bills so that you don't have these requirements piling on top of other requirements that say we got to fix a problem. There's always a question of how do they make that work, and they're trying to figure that out. Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
So you're saying to exclude the NSAs, but does that potentially hurt us in receiving funding for some of our infrastructure development related to sewers and advanced septic systems or whatever? But
right, there's no debate. I didn't mean exclude. I meant exclude from in the case of the first one, exclude the requirement for having duplex housing or two-family housing in all areas, exclude areas from that list that are already nitrogen sensitive.
You weren't talking about the second.
No.
Okay.
No. So, it just depends on, you got to write different things to them for different the different acts because they address
It's an
different issues.
incredibly complex bill. I mean,
It
I
is.
looked at it and it has, pages and pages of information that almost, you have to be a lawyer to fully understand, and references back and forth. But there is funding for things that may interest us.
Oh, there's lots of infrastructure funding.
And how do we tap into that would be my basic question. Money's short and tight, but it's out there. We just have to try to get it.
Okay, anybody else on the board? Tom?
I just didn't want to go too deep into the weeds here, Dan, but this phrase that they have sections that treat housing the same as ecological restoration.
Yeah.
I wonder what ecosystem they're replacing when they McMansionize a lot.
Yeah, and I think that that's just, the problem with reading all of these things is they use vague terms, so it's hard to nail down what it really means. And, then it gets cleaned up as it goes through court challenges to try to figure out how to narrow the definition. And it's hard to understand it, but the point being, you shouldn't treat housing as if it is an ecological restoration issue. Housing's a housing issue. It's an affordability issue. It's not an ecological restoration issue. So if you extract it out, then you don't have the requirements on the rest of the bill that you get to override things. So, yeah, that's why, again, I say, in the case of that bill, if you go read the letter from Mass Association of Conservation Commissioners, it's very specific, section by section, exactly what needs to change. So in that case, it's laid out. I wouldn't suggest you try to rewrite it, but rather what I did when I wrote is I referenced it. Right?
Good, thank you.
Peter, anything? Steve? Alan?
All right, thank you.
Ken, anything else?
Is there anything explicit in there for creation of affordable housing in the way of funding municipalities to acquire existing housing stock and convert it to affordable?
So the only thing I recall seeing in either one of these bills is there is money to convert unused municipal buildings into housing stock. Beyond that,
Small.
yeah, right. But that's mostly, they're trying to find a second use for the buildings that are otherwise
Well, that's
not being
legit.
used, so.
Actually, Dan, I think on that point, it's not just municipal. I think I remember reading that unused commercial property, right?
It may be as well,
Could be
yeah.
converted to residential. I think.
Could be.
I don't remember exactly what I read and when I read it, but.
Yeah, I don't either. There's too many bills that run together, yes.
There's an awful lot to this, and it's something we just became aware of in the past month or two. And coincidentally, there was a very interesting Board of Health meeting this past week on duplex zoning in the town of Falmouth. And there is a proposal for a town meeting article to allow duplexes in any residential lot in the town of Falmouth. And it had some very important resistance and information from Scott McGann on the implications to the septic and the nitrogen problems and the IAs and all of the associated issues that this committee and the town has been dealing with for some years, and is in active development of watershed plans to remediate the problems. And also a letter was sent by the town water superintendent relative to the additional development that bylaw change would allow, and he basically said, don't do it. So it ties in with this state-level stuff, which, in a nutshell, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, would allow increase in density, environmental consequences be totally ignored. Bottom line, housing would override environmental concerns. And if that happens, local towns would lose a lot of control and have a lot of additional costs to remediate any added nitrogen from these developments. So it's an area of great concern. It's happening quick. I did try to reach Senator Fernandez through his district director a couple of weeks ago on this, and I haven't heard anything back, so I'll go through the reps and see if we can get some action, and I'll try his office again. But it's an important issue. A lot of things going on as far as the board of the planning board's meeting. They mentioned, the water superintendent, that over the 4th of July, water use was so high that they couldn't keep the tanks full. the water tanks that sit up in the higher elevations and provide the pressure for flow, and very importantly, what's called fire flow. If those tanks don't have enough head in them to push water to a fire hydrant, they could open up a hydrant and get a dribble instead of a blast. And it could be a very major fire depending on conditions, if it's in the downtown area or Woods Hole, any densely packed area, a disaster. So in all of these things, the town of Falmouth will have to consider not only sewage and nitrogen and our degraded estuaries, but also our water supply. So it's a very timely issue. Tremendous amount of things are happening quickly. Stay tuned, everybody, and if you see it your way to reach out about this and express your concern, I will tomorrow have this information. If Dan or Tom can make sure I have the complete set of slides, I'll get it posted on the Water Quality Management Committee website, which anybody can access through the town website. Just go to committees, click on water quality management, and you'll see the website and relevant information posted, and I'll make sure we get this up promptly. Any questions from the audience? We've got a large group of people tonight. That's great. Love to have some folks that are interested in environmental issues show up, and this is a big one. This is absolutely huge, because if we lose our ability to control some of this, we've got a losing battle ahead. So, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep. And you have the presentation, right?
Okay, next up, we'll go back to the original order, presentation of draft watershed management plans for Oyster Pond and the Inner Harbor. Kristen Rathjen, who from ScienceWares, who is a consultant working with Amy Lowell and the wastewater department to develop the watershed plans. So,
hi, Amy Lowell, wastewater superintendent. I just wanted to do a brief introduction. I know there are at least a few people here from the Oyster Pond watershed this evening, and people who haven't necessarily been to all of the meetings leading up to this. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context. The town has done a lot of evaluation of many of the coastal pond watersheds over time, and in particular, Oyster Pond had a whole separate watershed planning process through Wright Pierce in the past. Right now, Kristen Rathjen with ScienceWares and the GHD are going through a process of updating the water use data for watershed evaluations, and then working with the town to put together a draft watershed plan for each nitrogen-sensitive area in Falmouth. So what Kristen has done is really, there's a lot of history here, and she's synthesized that to come up with a plan for each of the coastal pond watersheds. The thing is that where we are now is this is a work in progress. I would consider the presentations today and any of the previous presentations on the watershed plan to be preliminary working drafts. Kristen primarily has been presenting these to the Water Quality Management Committee as we're working on them. The goal is to, by the end of this calendar year, by the end of 2026, to have a draft plan for each that we can pull together and really begin. We put those all together and we look at overall numbers of denitrifying septic systems, for example, and overall phasing and overall costs, and then we can also go out to each of the communities and have meetings about these plans again, where we get a chance to have public feedback on them. So I just want to make it clear that this is not a final plan or even a proposed plan at this time. This is a preliminary plan that we are putting together as we go through and look at all the watersheds, and we'll put this together and be back again. For Oyster Pond, when it was previously evaluated with Wright Pierce and the Water Quality Management Committee, there was a lot of work going back and forth between whether this watershed would be properties in this watershed would be connected to the sewer system or would have their own denitrifying systems. The plan that Kristen is going to review today is going back to the individual denitrifying system concept for several reasons, and I believe Kristen has a slide about that, but in the basic couple of issues are, number one, this is an isolated area which is a ways from any other sewer area, and there are, in general, larger parcels that are more spread apart, so it is less efficient for sewering. Also, it is further out. It is not even on the capital plan for sewering at this point. So if there is interest in making progress in the Oyster Pond watershed in the next 20 years, innovative alternative septic systems, and actually for Woodrise, potentially its own wastewater treatment system would be the most time-efficient way to make progress.
Amy, I think you mean
I always do that.
Yeah.
I always do that, even though my mother-in-law lives there. Treetops. Treetops is the development, the main development here on the northeast side of Oyster Pond. So Kristen has done all the work, and I'll let her do the talking, but I just wanted to provide the overall context.
Thanks, Amy. Kristen Rathjen, ScienceWares. So we'll jump right into the Oyster Pond plans. So for people who haven't been here for other watershed plan presentations, the way the town is approaching this is looking at a couple of iterations. So counting what's considered alternative technologies by the state, so shellfish, credits for fertilizer reduction, stormwater management, and different performance levels for different types of septic systems. If all of those alternatives are performing as expected, that's what we're considering the preferred plan. For the state requires a backup plan that you can't count any of these alternatives. You can only count traditional sewering or nitrogen-reducing systems that have a performance level of 19 milligrams per liter. So there's a plan that considers all of that, which isn't shown here. But then working with the working group and what the town might reasonably expect, the town is putting together its contingency plan where the town is looking at maybe only 50% of the shellfish actually do what they're supposed to in a year, and half of the fertilizer credit. So we're adding some contingency factors into that preferred scenario to give a little bit of a conservative buffer. So these are the two plans side by side. We have a preferred plan and we have the Falmouth contingency plan. So as Amy said, almost 10 years ago now, Wright Pierce worked on a draft comprehensive wastewater management plan for Oyster Pond. And within that draft, it was identified two preferred scenarios. And the one that came out on top was using the nitrogen-reducing septic systems. What we have been working on is going through recent water use, which is a proxy to nutrient loading in there, comparing it to the original Massachusetts Estuaries Project numbers, comparing it to the work Wright Pierce did, and looking at what the numbers are today. The numbers are slightly different for what the loading is, but when the math gets done, pretty much Wright Pierce had recommended to achieve the target nitrogen load in Oyster Pond, all of the parcels would need a nitrogen-reducing system at 10 milligrams per liter. And that's pretty much what this exercise is also showing. So yellow parcels, these are parcels that have existing nitrogen-reducing septic systems. These pretty much all have performance levels through the state at 19 milligrams per liter. Under the preferred plan, these would be systems that can achieve 10 milligrams per liter or a 62% reduction in nitrogen from the effluent. Under the contingency, this would be systems that achieve 12 milligrams per liter, or a 54% reduction in septic nitrogen. So under the preferred plan, pretty much all of the main area of Oyster Pond is included, all of the parcels. Green parcels are currently undeveloped and are not expected to have any future flows. Orange parcels are conservation parcels, so all of the purple ones are developed ones that have existing septic systems. So the contingency part of the plan is if the systems that get put in through adaptive management and monitoring over the timing of the watershed permit, if the watershed is not getting to where it needs to be, additional work would need to be done. So the remaining parcels are the ones up here, I think that's Green Gate. Those are part of the contingency plan. So these are the numbers that make the math work for what the state is requiring. Obviously, when systems are installed and implementation happens, the town will be monitoring all of these to see how well things are performing and adjust as needed. So while everything, for the most part, is dark purple and included in the preferred plan, doesn't mean everything is getting done at one time. So the watershed permit period is a 20-year period. So this goes to what Amy started to talk about of why this watershed, you're looking at septic nitrogen reductions and not sewers. Amy mentioned a couple of them. The significant infrastructure requirement, again, this watershed is far away from existing sewers, would require installation of a lengthy force main within Woods Hole Road, and that's under Mass DOT jurisdiction. Again, the lots are larger, so it's not as cost effective to sewer because you're running more line for fewer homes. Amy said it's not included in the capital improvement plan, and with the limited other alternative technologies or fish that have been identified for there through service. So for near-term water quality improvements, the watershed will need to pursue wastewater reductions through septic system upgrades, as well as the fertilizer reductions and stormwater managements. The numbers that were presented on the first slide was for the whole watershed. Oyster Pond, in the total maximum daily load requirements, it's not broken out into sub-watersheds, so it's still a whole watershed picture. There's also the build-out consideration. So under the preferred plan, which again is the dark purple parcels, you achieve 104% of the target nitrogen reduction. For build-out, as a result of the Board of Health current mandate that any new flow is 10 milligrams per liter or less, using the Massachusetts Estuaries Project build-out values, this current plan achieves 84% of that. Under the contingency plan, you're still meeting the target and not getting as far on the build-out. So these are the numbers that are associated with the build-out, just to show how they fall differently between the preferred plan and the contingency plan. So the Board of Health, their 10 milligram per liter mandate, because of that, any new flow would be about 365 kilograms. Look, I missed a number.
Kristen, where is the build-out? Can you?
Where, I cannot tell you where it is. Some of it is associated with redevelopment of existing parcels. Some of them are, some of these purple ones are vacant parcels that can be built. I should have said that. Currently, GHD is working on the town-wide build-out projections on a parcel-by-parcel basis by taking the MEP values and distributing it over land use types. So we don't have the specifics there, but we're using the MEP values, and then it's a blanket for the watershed. It matters more where build-out might be when you have a sewer area where that discharge would be outside of the watershed because you're removing everything. So where additional building happens in Oyster Pond for the numbers game doesn't really make a difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just curious where it was.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe you're making a duplex.
Yeah. Get in
That
line.
brings up an interesting thing about the duplexes, which is there's probably a price cutoff point. Above that, it's not in the owner's interest to devalue their estate by changing it into duplex. It is. I'm
Let
not
me
a
know.
real
Let me
estate
know the
expert,
results when you determine that.
but The Ready and the Wins Act people might want to think about that.
Like for the board of, the planning board and the state. So let's move on with the watershed.
This is the summary of the long-term data set at the Sentinel Station. This is the UMass, University of Massachusetts School of Marine Science and Atmospheric Technology. This is the Sentinel Station. It's the long-term monitoring station. This is the summary of the data. The red line represents the target as identified by the total maximum daily load report. So you can see that it's variable over time. As far as eelgrass, all of the eelgrass and seagrass that has been captured on the DEP aerial eelgrass surveys is outside of the watershed. That's all for Oyster Pond.
Okay, well, I'll go through the board quick. A brief comment from anyone specific to this watershed. And if it's a general watershed planning comment, I would like to then instead save those questions until the next watershed is presented. So anybody along the board, I'll start at this end with Ken. Anything, Ken?
So I know that the water quality in the pond is affected a lot by the exchange with Vineyard Sound, which occasionally gets blocked off, and then it becomes fresh and more stratified and so forth. Is any of that going to go in, somehow maintaining appropriate circulation into the planning process?
So the maintenance of the weir falls under Marine and Environmental Service, to my knowledge. I don't actually know what their maintenance schedule is, so that's, or operational schedule, so that's a conversation to have as far as Chuck. I know that, as you said, definitely there's impacts to the estuary as a whole and maintained, so.
Okay, Alan?
Oh, hold on a second. I think that is a good comment, and we can talk with Chuck and look at including, we have to make sure that any commitment we make is consistent with the resources and whatever the ability is of MES to complete that work. But we can certainly include something about that in the watershed plan.
Thank you, Amy. Alan, go ahead.
Question, for those homes in the Green Gate, how many years out from the start of the implementation of this would it be to determine that, no, we are or we aren't making it with the initial IAs, and we have to trigger those homes?
So that comes back to some of Amy's comments about once we have the townwide picture, looking at the phasing within a watershed permit. If you're looking at phasing the preferred plan, that would be over the 20-year period, and toward the end of that watershed permit might be the decision to look at the contingency. So it may be an extension of the permit, it may be a second permit. These are all conversations that have to be had once the townwide plan is in place. Dear Lord.
Go ahead.
Follow up on that. As we've talked about in previous meetings, the recovery period for ponds is slow and unpredictable, so that we don't have a complete answer to that, but we will have to propose a schedule within the watershed plan and then evaluate over time.
One more, Alan.
Yeah, just a small sort of housekeeping thing. I noted in the map for the harbor that there's street names. There's no street names here. Maybe the scale of the map washed them out, but it would be helpful. We all are familiar with maps, but folks who aren't say, is my home in there? We don't have, identifying some
Well,
roads
so
as
don't
well.
forget, these are drafts and this is not the plan. So once it becomes part of the application for an actual watershed permit, that's when it becomes the plan. So we don't want people on alert or, yep.
Guide folks to
Yep.
where they are.
Sorry about that, but I live in the area. First, I want to concur with what Alan just said. And even though this is preliminary, I think we should do this for all the watersheds. I think there should be a list of the property addresses, and that should be made public, with a note that it's preliminary, but you don't get people interested until, as I said in another meeting, if you say 20 people are going to be shot at dawn, people say, well, 100 million people die in the world every year. If you say you're going to be shot at dawn, it gets somebody's attention. And I hear you that it's preliminary, but you don't want to go saying it's preliminary, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. Oh, this is the final plan, too late to make any changes. That doesn't make sense. The second is...
That wasn't a question.
Good point. Depends on
I
who's
think
standing.
part of our function is to make comments. When I was working in Maryland, engineers were required to show their work, to submit to the town where they were getting permit, their actual calculations. When we were working with Ed Leonard at Wright Pierce on the initial report 10 or so years ago, he actually came to the conclusion that sewers would be less expensive than IAs. Of course, that was using the costs of the time, but the rising inflation lifts all the boats. And I would like to see the calculations that were done now that come to the opposite conclusion.
So the cost estimate side, again, has not been looked at until we have a town-wide picture. So that is another phase of the planning process.
But you had a slide where you stated that one was less than the other. I'm an engineer. That implies there are two numbers that were compared.
This is not on Kristen, this is
Right.
me.
It's not your fault.
Well, no, it is. So
Okay, let us speak.
you are right. We have not done a follow-up detailed cost estimate for this. This is a general statement about efficiency in general. We do need to, there is, as Kristen said, another phase to this project where we look at sewer costs and IA implementation, and we can provide, that documentation will be provided as part of the watershed plan.
Okay. And the last question/comment, if you can go back to that slide with the map. And this is also something that either Alan or Ken mentioned, following up on it, that the Green Gate parcel, how many years does it take for a wavefront to go from there to Oyster Pond?
They are more than 10.
All right, so if the trigger is pulled that said you're not making it with the preferred plan, you have to go to the contingency plan. Granted, most of us won't be alive then, but you guys will be. But, is there then enough time legally to implement that and also have it arrive at the pond and make a difference in time to make the measurement turn out to be sufficient?
That's a DEP question. The DEP, the permits are not requiring the Sentinel stations to be meeting their watershed permit period. What the watershed permit requirements having is efforts and implementations to reduce it and justification of how much that load has been reduced by, and supporting data. So for septic systems or sewering, measuring what your effluent concentration is, measuring like Ken's groundwater wells in Little Pond. So data to support the reductions that have occurred in that watershed.
Okay, the thing to remember here is the goal is to clean up the estuary. By the data, the pond is not doing well. I haven't looked at it personally to see is there all sorts of problems, or is it, not too bad? Does it smell? Does it have algae mats? Is it opaque water, or can you see down a couple of feet? So those are more observational things on it. But if we want to have something improve in that pond on a timely basis, remember the earlier statement, there is nothing in the 20-year capital plan for sewering this area. So let's say that becomes, after some analysis of cost, it's cheaper than IAs, but reasonable time frame says you're probably more than 20 years out for a whole bunch of technical and economic reasons. And the quicker way to get something happening is IAs. Requires a tremendous investment. There's a fairness committee in town that's looking at making that more equitable, but there's a whole bunch of issues with that. Remember the goal, clean up the pond. 20-year horizon, there's no budget for any sewering in the area. IA mandates when an area, if it's in a zone like this, and we say, well, especially those that are closest to the pond, you're going to get an IA. Then when that will be required, the trigger date depends on really a lot of debate amongst the town boards and a Board of Health decision as to when they would want that trigger pulled, whether it's sale of property. Right now they have only increase in flow, whether it's a new build or a tear down and renovation or adding a bedroom. Flow increase in that area would require an IA. There are no other triggers currently, but down the road there's going to have to be. So, go ahead. Peter, anything?
Thank you. Yes. Building on Ken's question. Okay. Building on Ken's question about the circulation in the pond with the ocean, and Amy said that it will be investigated what the current plans are with the water people, and I think it's important to have some measure of cost for having more circulation in Oyster Pond and other ponds versus the other methods of cleaning up. And I'm not sure if the present dredging plans respect it or think about the cost to the residents of Falmouth. That's it.
Okay, and Tom?
I know we're not going to get back into the cost thing because it's just too far down the line, but the other thing to remember is that sewering is almost twice as effective at removing nitrogen as IAs. So in an ideal world, you would sewer half the number of houses that you were going to require IAs for. And I know that's not in the planning and not in the time frame we're looking at, but it's something you really need to keep in mind going forward when we're doing these cost things. When we first started looking at Oyster Pond, we had 7 different cost scenarios we were trying to look. Steve, you were around then, I think.
You hit on what part of Ed Leonard's solution is how he got.
Yeah, but it was just, there was just so many different cost alternatives based on the present cost, the future cost of money, and everything all the way through. It was a real mishmash of stuff. But I really want people to keep in mind the trade-off with the sewering versus IAs. IAs seem like a really good Band-Aid, but when you go in sewering, you're basically taking all the nitrogen out and going forward from there. And I'll thought there.
Good point. John?
All I'd add is what's been said. I'd like to see the cost-benefit analysis for widening the openings to allow better circulation and see how that stacks up against all these IAs and potential sewers.
Okay, but just say one thing to the whole inlet issue. The town has had a more aggressive maintenance of that channel in the past few years. Again, I don't know from any personal observation whether the residents have noticed that aiding in the health of the pond. I will say also that the town of Falmouth, probably a dozen years ago, started looking at the options for Bourne's Pond watershed. And as part of the original budget that funded the Little Pond Sewer Service Area, they had money in there, hasn't been spent yet, to widen that inlet. That's been tied up with a nightmare of state, local, and federal permits. Last I understood, we're pretty close to having all the permits, and hopefully we'll have enough money still left in that bond issue, or that town meeting warrant and passed by the citizens issue, to fund that. But it's taken a dozen years or so to get almost to construction. Not quite, but almost. So, any quick questions on the specific watershed from people in the audience? Yes, ma'am. Please come up, identify yourself, and...
Hi there. I'm Meredith Golden, and I live near the Oyster Pond, in the Oyster Pond watershed. And my question actually is how the potential impacts over the next 20 years from sea level rise might impact what the decisions are. Specifically, with sea level rise, we might be getting that flow that we want into the sound, but also, even though we're a separate watershed, how is Woods Hole currently dealing with its waste? Maybe I'm wrong. I thought there was a sewer connection to Woods Hole.
There is.
If that currently is along Surf Drive and will be underwater, I imagine the best thing would then be to go up to Woods Hole Road, which goes right through the Oyster Pond watershed and could provide what's needed at a less price for the Oyster Pond. The other thing I wanted to also say, it's not just the nitrogen that we have to worry about over the next 20, 50 years, but there are emerging chemicals of concern that a sewer system could deal with that the IA will not be able to deal with. So those are just my two kind of questions and comments.
Start on that. The first thing about Woods Hole, you're right, Woods Hole is connected to the sewer system, and there is a pump station in Woods Hole which pumps up under the bike path and up to the Cheverix Pond lift station behind Main Street. Or excuse me, it pumps to the Jones Palmer lift station at the hospital lights. Connecting into that is the pipe that goes up the bike path, and that could, a number of years in the future, be moved inland. That pipe is a force main, meaning it's a higher pressure pipe, and it's a significant deal to connect to to a force main, and it is something that is very rarely, that there's only one of those in Falmouth, and it's something that I'd be very cautious about doing in the future. Normally, the connections are made to gravity mains, meaning there's no pressure in the main. So it's not a small thing to propose doing that. It's a significant engineering challenge and risk. And I think when we were talking to Wright Pierce, what we were looking at was a separate force main to get up to the Jones Palmer lights instead of connecting into the force main from Woods Hole to reduce risk in that case. Your other questions were about, well, CECs, point taken, neither the treatment plant nor denitrifying septic systems are specifically designed to manage contaminants or to treat for contaminants of emerging concern. In the future, a wastewater treatment facility could be modified to accommodate that, but our treatment plant currently is not designed for that. You had an initial question that I've forgotten. Do you recall?
Sea level rise.
Sea level rise. So this is related sort of to your original Flushing subject. So John brought up inlet widening. To my knowledge, inlet widening has not been proposed as a realistic solution for Oyster Pond. Maintenance of the existing system that drains and does of the system that flows in and out of Oyster Pond is recommended and has been, as somebody mentioned more recently, renewed with the Marine Environmental Services. But this particular inlet is not, it would not be realistic or helpful to widen it to improve.
Amy, it was considered a long time ago, but it was rejected because Oyster Pond is unique compared to all the other estuaries. It's neither salt nor fresh. It's brackish. It's in between, which
Right.
is slightly salty.
That's a definition.
Okay.
Has the value
Sir?
of herring.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, you asked for, you had your hand up, so I was going to recognize you next. So if you want to come up and use the mic so everyone can hear you, thank you.
Hi, Bill Kerfoot. Been involved with evaluations of the pond and its maintenance for probably over 30 years. It's a salt pond. It's not an estuary. So as you are well aware, it's a very narrow outlet. And in fact, the pond is right now at a positive consideration. The water level is higher inside than the mean sea level outside. So except in big storms, you don't have salt water going into it. And one of the DEP has overseen its operation for quite some period of time because of the large amount of herring. There's over 400,000 herring that can go out at the end of the year, and it considers it to be a very herring reservoir salt pond at the present time. So Amy referred to it as just saying simply, there's been a lot of work with the DEP relative to the pond on how it should operate at the present time, and that's the way. In terms of sea level rise, very good question. A lot of ramifications associated with that. It's because it is projected to go up 18 feet in the next 40 years. You have to pay attention to that.
Not 18.
I think you mean 18 inches.
What?
Oh,
18
if it's 18 feet.
I said feet. No, thanks.
We're all swimming.
Kayaks here in
Sorry,
the room.
not that much. We'll start floating away then. We do have to pay great attention here in town to water loss. We are at our balance right now with regard to the amount of, we only get a certain amount of recharge from rainwater. We don't have any other water sources we can depend on. And so we have to be careful about any discharge out. So when you say the sewering considerations, they all have to be carefully balanced and looked at, because even though right now we have taken recently an outfall situation, that still on calculations represents only about 2.6% of our total recharge. But if we start getting to the point where we move too much water out into the sound, then all of our pond levels will drop. And the water that we have problems on right now, withdrawing enough during the summertime, will become much more difficult and may be subject to saltwater intrusion.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't remember whose hands were up first. I'll start here on my left. Go ahead, sir. Come on up.
May I sit because of mobility issues?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You have a nice loud voice. It'll
We
carry.
installed a RUC system in 2014. It's been in 10 years now. it has averaged take approximately 89% of the nitrogen. The absolute levels over the years, 10 years now, is something like 5.1 milligrams per liter. And indeed, just this past June, that's exactly where we were. So I think the IA systems are about twice as good as people like to believe. We live right, if you look at the map, look at the D, at the bottom of the D you see a little bit of yellow that sticks into the pond, and that's where we live. So I just would make these data available to you if you would like them. But I think to say that you must go below 12 milligrams per liter is an underestimate of what the systems today can do. And I'll bet there are better systems than what we have.
Thank you. That's an interesting point. You know, the RUC system, unfortunately, is no longer available. It's been discontinued by the inventor, manufacturer, whatever we wish to refer them as. But that's a great point. Thank you for that. Go ahead. Now, moving this way, sir, you next to the last roll.
Hi, Andy Wexler. I'm on the OPET board, and I live directly on the pond, in fact, in the other little peninsula there. Thoroughly agree with the fact that we should be reducing nitrogen in the pond. And when we take a look at that spike of outflow that we saw there, we had one recent algae bloom in 2019 or 2020 there, directly result of the fact that that outflow was somewhat, had required dredging. And when that dredging has taken place, we have remained fairly algae-free through that period of time. That said, in terms of putting in the independent systems on the houses, of course there's the cost, but the question is of the effectiveness of it. Many of the houses, including mine, on the pond are occupied for only 6, maybe 7 months a year. What I have read about the various systems that are currently in existence is that one needs to have continuous use of that system for it to be effective. The bacteria that are part of that system need to be recharged, that they do not get the adequate nutrition that they need. And so the question is that, and then of course when you went around to test it, which is going to be a charge as well to the homeowner, you would be testing and you'd be failing all the time because essentially these systems are meant to be continuous systems. There are a great many houses around the Oyster Pond area that are not occupied for the entire extent of the year. And if they are occupied, you're looking at maybe 2 people or 3 or 4 people total, which isn't a huge lot of nitrogen output. So the question is not whether you need systems to do something, but whether those systems are actually effective, given the cost that you're putting them in to do the job. Now, technology is improving all the time, obviously, and as the years go on, hopefully we'll have something that works better that doesn't require that full-time use. But I think that has to somehow be considered before you say, no, everyone should be putting in these systems that are costing a pretty penny, plus the monitoring is a pretty penny as well, but they're not going to be effective given those types of criteria.
Thank you.
May I answer that?
Yes.
That is, we did worry about that to begin with. We've lived there year-round for the last 2 years, made no difference at all. We've never had a problem, right? The first year, we made our first measurements only a month after we put the system in, and we were already taking out 50% of the nitrogen. By the next year, it was 80%, and it stayed at that level or beyond ever since. So I don't think that's a problem. Now, it is true there are RUC systems aren't being made anymore, but there are other systems that I understand are even better than the RUC system.
It's an excellent question and a point you raised, sir, because the seasonality has been part of the conversation with the IA manufacturers. At this time, at our next meeting in 2 weeks, I have scheduled the Clean2 company, which manufactures the Nitro E, which is the best system out there right now. They have over 300 en masse, so it'll be a good question. In a previous presentation to us, probably a year or more ago, they said seasonality has not been an issue with their systems, but it's an excellent consideration. It's characteristic of a lot of Falmouth, especially the closer you get to the water, the more seasonality. Sir, you were raising your hand for quite a while. Please come up.
My name is Jeff Klopek. I'm also a resident of the Watershed. Ed, you mentioned a fairness committee that's going to be looking into financial equities. I'm wondering if you can tell us any more about that, whether they have public meetings, whether we can provide input to them, and a little bit more background on that.
There is, the town, I understand, is still reviewing applications to that committee, so they haven't met yet. I'm not sure what format they will follow. It probably will not be public open meetings, at least initially, but I do not know that. So, but it's close to formation, and then things will hopefully happen on a quick time basis. So stay tuned. You know, when we hear anything, and we'll let everybody know through this forum. Good question.
Thank you.
Okay. Gentleman in the back, got your hand up. You sir.
Yes, thank you.
You have to come up to the mic, though. Sorry.
Thank you. My name's Jonathan Smith. I live at 55 Ransom Road. And Ransom Road, the properties along our road front the pond on the northwest side. The road also has some frontage. My question for the people putting this together is about the extent of the watershed, the teardrop shape that's up here on the map. We're having our annual meeting for the private road in a couple weeks. Some of the properties on the road are on that teardrop. Many of them are not. And I'm wondering how the teardrop was developed, if that is a static thing, if that could increase in size or contract in size before final report is coming out. I'd just like to know a little bit more about how that's established. Thank you.
Okay. Kristen or Amy, you want to answer that, how the watershed shape and borders were defined?
So the watersheds were defined by USGS. It's based on groundwater flow and evaluations that they did. When the Massachusetts Estuaries Project began its evaluations, those were the boundaries that they used. Yes, they can shift over time. They don't generally. As far as determining which parcels are in or out, some of it is dependent on where your septic system is located relative to that line, but also the Cape Cod Commission did their own analysis, and in their database they have each parcel, and the Massachusetts Estuaries Project as well. Parcels are assigned to their watershed. For Massachusetts Estuaries Project, where a parcel was split between two watersheds, appropriate loading calculations were determined for 50% of that parcel was in the watershed. So it's all taken into consideration, but those are the lines from USGS.
Go ahead, Amy.
The watershed boundary will not change for this planning process. So in answer to the question, and related to an earlier point, we can certainly, in a different version of these are the scale of these doesn't make sense to put road names on them, but we can at a different scale put road names on them to help with people looking at that.
As I mentioned before, I'd like to see that as a tabular list posted on the web. Street addresses.
I personally think it's too early for that.
It is. I agree with Amy on that, but as soon as that is practical to show and define,
or at least
that will happen.
Of the whole watershed. You just said that's not going to change.
Hi, Vicki Lowell, live in Treetops, which is, I think it's the only sort of that type of community in the watershed where we have 62 units on a commonly owned land, and trying to retrofit that with I think now there's 20 odd separate septic systems. Not each unit has its own, but this will be way in the future, but when I understand that we would, if we do the IAs, the systems, we would, the property has to hire the engineering to do the work. It would probably be difficult, but it might be much more effective to try and just have one unit one treatment system, and I was wondering, so when you're thinking of that in the future, would we somehow get credit for doing better than just having, 22 add-ons to what we already have? I mean, I suppose when we get to that point, you'd hire the engineering and the analysis to show what the differences would be, but it's something to consider, because I know Falmouthport is now, they're joining the sewer, but so they don't have to make that decision, but it would be a big decision for our community which way to go, whether to try and consolidate into one treatment system, which would probably be more effective than having all the separate ones, because we're also highly seasonal, not, it's only about a third year round. So just something to think about. Thank you.
Excellent point. If that was developed now under current Board of Health regs, it would require a cluster system. So the technology's better. It is, as you stated, much more efficient and easier to maintain that performance level to put in a cluster system. And
but the
Board of Health regs require it for, I think it's 5 or more unit developments have to have that.
Yeah, so. I know. I think I understand that, but the thing is, it's much more difficult to retrofit something that already exists than to do it from the beginning. Thank you.
Understand. Good point. Hilda, you were next. I think. Go ahead. You want to respond to that? Go
So I spoke with Scott McGann earlier this week about treetops, and the difference between that and the Board of Health, where it's 5 parcels. Treetops is an individual parcel, so under Title V, it goes by number of bedrooms. So treetops should be under its own groundwater discharge permit with its own treatment plant. Right now, groundwater discharge permits are at 10 milligrams per liter, unless it's a special case. So it's still the equivalent nitrogen reduction of what's being counted in the preferred plan at 10.
Okay, Hilda, you were next.
Hilda Menge, Green Center. I would like to thank Steve for your comment, Steve Layton, for your comment about telling people right now and tell them it's a draft. They need to prepare. There are people that know if this is coming up, they might have to move. They have to prepare. And even though it's a draft, if they know it's a draft, then they know it might not happen to that particular house, but it is very likely if they're right in the center. They should know, and the sooner the better, and not wait. There's no reason to wait. The other one is I would like to make a case for performance-based evaluations and not nitrogen concentration, because nitrogen concentration means nothing. We need to know the load. And as I have said before in our studies that we did, it's very clear that people can have a very high concentration, their load is nothing, because they're very conservative in their water use. And if we're going to do all these IAs all based on one particular flow, which is not essential for that particular household, then these people have to do, just like this gentleman said, they make an IA for absolutely no benefit because they had no load. They had a very high concentration, but they had no load. So to make this statement of having a plan built on every IA performing the same way on paper at 10 milligrams per liter, which they already know that's not going to happen, is not a really strong argument for a plan. It's not going to show what it's actually going to do. That was mentioned before. It's not a real number. It's a number on paper that works for the state, but it's not a number that works for the environment, because we need to have the load reduced. That is what we want to do. We want to get the nitrogen out in loads and not in concentration. Does that make sense?
Good point, Hilda. And, we are aware of that, and it's just something that we have to work with the DEP on.
We are working
to change their regulations. But Thank you for your input. Appreciate it.
That's what we are working on. But I would like to have that constantly in the evaluation.
Okay, just maybe 1 or 2 more on this so we can move on. It's gone on for a while, but this is great. I really appreciate the commitment and the attendance and the interest of the residents of the area in being here tonight and learning about this and giving very important input. So go ahead, sir. You were next. Is there anyone else that's going to want to speak? If not, we'll move on to the next after this gentleman.
So I think this is quick. Just one question. The preferred nitrogen reduction district has 140 parcels. Is Treetops one parcel or is it 62? It's one of those. Okay. And the other thing is, I was going to make the same point some others have about financial equity, which is a big concern. I think the town is aware that people are concerned, and I hope they're fairly open about where that goes, because, well, it's obvious, we don't want to.
It's an active committee, just it hasn't been staffed yet, if that's the right word, but thank you. Good point. Okay, Kristen, you want to bring up the Inner Harbor?
So, excuse me. I apologize. I have to go to the T-Ticket Association meeting at 6, so you can. I'm not going to be here for most of that presentation. I'll be leaving in 5 minutes. I apologize.
Yeah, thank you. I was supposed to be there too, but I told them I'll be late if they're at all. Go ahead, Kristen. Thanks, Amy.
Want me to talk really fast? All right, Inner Harbor, another small watershed. We'll get right into it. For this one, the preferred plan has an extension of the existing sewer service area. So our dark pink, purple, so blue parcels are the existing sewer. Dark pink are what is covered in the preferred plan. So these would be the ones that when you're also considering shellfish, so there's a significant acreage of shellfish within this that Marine and Environmental Services identified for in there, as well as when you consider fertilizer, stormwater, and atmospheric deposition credits. Should the shellfish not perform, taking the 50% credit that we talked about for the contingency, and also reducing fertilizer and stormwater, you'd have to expand sewer slightly. Those would be the light pink areas. Those are the contingency sewer areas. There are no septic nitrogen reduction districts recommended for here, again, based on the proximity to the existing sewer, and as we've been doing with the other watersheds, working closest to the surface water and working further up in the watershed. That is what makes the most cost-effective sense, because infrastructure is already there. So under the preferred plan, you achieve the target nitrogen reduction requirement, and under the preferred, under the contingency, you actually exceed it a bit. Part of that is just because of which roads make sense to run the sewer line and where you would be connecting. So Inner Harbor has a couple of sub-watersheds. So it has the main watershed, and then there's the Morse Pond culvert up here. With the plan, with atmospheric deposition and the fertilizer credits and stormwater credits, and on a sub-watershed level, both Morse Pond culvert and the Inner Harbor itself would meet under the preferred plan and under the contingency plan. As I said earlier, with build-out, when there's a sewer area, what parcels are already in the sewer, what they can potentially build out has to be subtracted out of there if it's out of watershed discharge. So that is forthcoming as that part is still being evaluated. We have the Sentinel Station long-term data. This is monitored by the Center for Coastal Studies, so you can see it's kind of variable within this watershed. I also want to say that according to Chuck Martinson, the water quality in Falmouth Inner Harbor is pretty good, and last year they got it opened provisionally for shellfish. Open? What did Inner Harbor get for shellfish? Was it provisional?
It's conditional.
Conditional?
It's winter, it ends in March, and it's unfortunately, again, one of the boat-denominated systems, and they had a scary thing a week ago. They had a fuel spill, and it made it into the upwellers where the larval oysters are being grown, and I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be, but when I see that enormous area in there, and then I see the chances of fuel spills, I'm quite worried. But it took years, it took at least 10 years of arguing with the state even to get a conditional opening for the harbor. And well, I don't want to get into the weeds on that, but it is questionable.
And as far as eelgrass, all of the eelgrass is located outside of the harbor. That's Inner Harbor.
Okay, from the board, questions, anybody, starting with Jonathan?
No questions.
Tom?
No, I pretty much said what I was going to say about my concerns about using it to grow shellfish.
Okay. Peter? Questions? Steve? Alan? Ken?
I don't have anything.
Okay, I'll throw one at it because I have noticed that the draft watershed plans now differ in some areas significantly from the geo-boundary exercise we went into in 2024 and early 2025, or I think we finished it in 2024. So, this one in particular had, I think, Inner Harbor was like 149 single-family dwellings in the IA, defined to be in an IA district. Now we're not looking at that. And Kristen, you want to give that explanation?
So the geo-boundary exercise, those are all still very valid exercises. That is essentially the DEP backup plan. When that was being done, that's without counting any fertilizer credits, stormwater credits, shellfish, or atmospheric deposition. What you need to meet your targets. At that time, the outfall was not far enough along in planning whether it could go either way at that point. So discussing additional sewering when there was no capacity for land-based discharge, this was not a priority estuary for the land-based discharge. So should something go wrong and we're back to land-based discharge, this would probably revert back to a version of what the geo-boundary was, but including shellfish, fertilizer, stormwater, those credits.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one quick follow-up to that?
Okay, and then Earl, you'll be next, so I want to mosey up to the mic.
With the new preferred targets plan you have, is the number of nitrogen-reducing septic systems, IAs, significantly lower than it was when we went through that other exercise where it was somewhere between 6,000, 7,000? That's the number we commonly throw out there, but have the numbers dropped down because of these other?
So when you can actually consider the alternatives even at 50%, like for the shellfish, yes, the number comes down. But again, the state requires a traditional backup plan that if none of this works, how do you get there? So the 7,000 number, without looking at sewer expansions as a whole, because we didn't do that for geo-boundaries, that's still what for septic upgrades would be.
Worst case scenario.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Earl.
Yeah, Earl Barnard, Green Center.
It's over 8,000.
One description that they gave is to do the alternatives first, and if they do not work, you shift to some contingency one. But when they designed this plan on shellfish, for instance, they immediately assume it doesn't work, and they're going to give it a 50% credit in the plan. That makes no sense at all to me. Why not try the oysters, see if they work, and if they don't work, you do something. You don't assume ahead of time 50% it don't work. It makes no sense to me.
Kristen, you want to address that? Thank you, Earl.
In the preferred plan, we are counting on full performance. So that is what the dark pink area, and that is what goes in with the full performance of shellfish. So shellfish are pretty susceptible to disease, all kinds of other things, fuel in the upweller. So it's a contingency factor that as the watershed permit progresses, if you find that they're not performing and not enough nitrogen is coming out through the combination of everything, what's the next step of what might have to be done? So like we talked about in Oyster Pond where you had the light purple contingency areas, one of the considerations would be that the light pink sewer contingency area here is after that initial watershed permit, after the adaptive management phase. So you are trying your shellfish for that watershed permit duration. You are looking at the preferred sewer area for that duration and all of the other credits within there to see where you're at.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
I don't think, please, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think, Earl, it's that bad, because even if you don't mention oyster harvesting, I mean, aquaculture in any plan, if it's there and if it works, by definition, the concentration of the Sentinel station will go down. I mean, even if aliens land from Mars secretly at night and no one sees them, and the nitrogen goes down, then it means that the plan worked, even though you don't know why. So then it is being utilized.
Remember, too, these plans, once accepted and implemented, will require 5-year updates. How's it doing? Where are you in your implementation? And where are you in water quality? So there is an ongoing update. These are drafts and very preliminary drafts. Final plans are some ways down the road, and then you need state acceptance, and then you start doing it, and then you are looking at your performance, which hopefully will be quick impacts, but I'm not that optimistic. It will take years. It has taken almost 10 years for Little Pond to get to the level it is at right now. So it's a live document. New alternatives may come up, and better IA systems or some other magic way of removing the nitrogen, and that would be part of monitoring the plan going forward. Hilda, you want to speak? Go ahead.
Hilda Menge, I have that magic one. It's composting toilets and incinerating toilets that are already permitted. They're better than any IA. They have nitrogen loads that are so small I can barely find it. And they're not part of the plan, but they're already approved. And they're more stable and reliable than any of the other ones that are not even approved. Right now we're putting plans together with IAs that are 10 milligrams per liter. That is inconsistent right now. We haven't found a system yet that works consistently. But we have toilets that are already approved and they're not in the plan. I just don't understand that.
Okay, but your point is well taken, and something that we'll continue to look at going forward as we evaluate these things and the contingencies. One thing about composting toilets, yes, they are now currently permitted under state law, and there would be a requirement for the Board of Health to implement a consideration of that in their IA reg, saying these will count as an IA, and they already have approved, I believe, one installation of a composting or an incinerating toilet for a house in lieu of an IA. On an exception basis, it happened. It is considered, and they are approved technologies. It would have to, in a larger scale, be 100% of any toilet. No other toilets allowed. All waste must go through that device, just as it would have to in urine diversion. There would not be a plan that would be acceptable to only, well, we got 4 bathrooms, but we'll put in 1 composting or incinerating toilet and we're done. Compliance would require monitoring to make sure the owner or a subsequent owner didn't scrap it. You'd still need a Title V for your gray water, and that is a consideration, but it is something that already the Board of Health has made an exception and considered that as an IA, and the state allows it. So it's a good point. It's evolving, and hopefully it'll get even bigger and wider acceptance, but right now it is very, very limited acceptance.
Acceptance by whom?
By the public, by people that would have to convert and put in.
It's not we need to put it on a plan, things that actually take the nitrogen out. If they're approved already and they can do a certain nitrogen reduction, they should be in the plan. If people don't want them for some reason, then you have to do twice as many IAs.
Right.
But people have to understand that. But just to clearly say people don't want them,
If people wanted them, there would be a lot more than there already are. But I understand your point.
no, because right now people are waiting because they don't know if they have, on top of that, have to hook up to a sewer, or on top of that, have to have an IA. Because it is not an IA. It's better than an IA.
I think when people see the cost of the IAs, if they haven't already, and they need to compare the multiple technologies that are available, and I agree with Hilda, it shouldn't be IA only. If we have an approved technology and it costs a fraction of what the IAs cost and it does the job we need it to do, then why isn't it part of the basket of solutions in the pink areas?
It is an alternative that has the precedent of acceptance by our Board of Health under their septic Title V reg, which subset of that is the IA reg. So if somebody says, look, I'm putting in a new house or I'm adding a bathroom and I don't want to do an IA, but I'll convert my whole house to composting or incinerating toilets. That's a Board of Health decision at this point, and people can do that. They can ask. Someone did.
Hilda has the point that it's not unreasonable to make it at least as routine, even if not as common, as IA.
The devil is in the implementation and in the Board of Health.
Yeah.
Currently, they have that authority.
No, the part that Hilda won't like is the regs have to be hard-nosed about all fixtures and monitoring and so on.
Right.
But the part where I agree with her, and I think you don't, is there shouldn't be this allergy to putting it in our reports.
Well, it's also about the load,
There's no way
right?
to quantify it at this point because we don't have an implementation path. Yes, you can do it, and on an exception basis, it has been done. That's a Board of Health implementation thing, and the whole complexity of IA implementation and triggers is just incredible. It'll make your head spin, and the Board of Health is really having a lot of difficulty making it happen. But it's certainly something that, A, is approved technology, and B, the Board of Health has accepted. So it is accepted. I think it's a tough road to get widespread adoption, but it can happen with
If it's on the plan that these houses should be a certain load or less, right? Say, it should all be by load. And that's why it doesn't matter if you have one or two bathrooms on a particular composting toilet. If you show that the load, twice a year, whatever, is below a certain amount, then you're set. And that's what we have proven. It doesn't matter. You don't have to do all bathrooms. Okay. And it's all clear also with people that even never in their house for more than 3 months. If you can show that you have a load, a certain amount, below a certain amount that is needed to get to the point of the goal that we need to achieve, then that's all you have to show. You don't have to show all your bathrooms. It doesn't matter what you do as long as your load is lower. And that is ultimately the goal as far as I understand.
Load percentage reduction is part of the Board of Health regulations, and hopefully tonight we'll at least get to do a first cut through the RME that we've postponed since last spring. Okay.
Can I do one? So in the plans that are being presented, not with this one because this is a sewer plan, but in Oyster Pond, the purple areas say septic nitrogen reduction district. So again, it falls under the Board of Health. It says either a performance level, which is a state regulatory performance level of 10 milligrams per liter, or a certain % reduction. So how the Board of Health decides to incorporate any of the technologies that may be considered Bannert, may be considered nitrogen reducing, that's on Board of Health. But there is a way in the plan to account for all of it with the right monitoring schemes.
Okay, thank you. a lot of issues here, and they're very, very complex, and I think the more people look at it and listen to what the Board of Health is facing and discussing, and what the overall town and the whole Cape and parts of the state like the Vineyard and Nantucket are facing with these very issues, it's enough to really make your head spin. The complexity will be evident as we start talking about the next item, the RME draft. Tom, do you still have a slide that we can put up for that, or John?
Do you have, I don't.
I have my thumb drive if you want to put it up there.
I think it might be instructive for people who haven't looked at it, hopefully to...
Kristen, could you be the putter-upper, please?
That was already in motion, Tom.
Thank you, Kristen.
I didn't want to have to tase you.
Hopefully over the last few months when we've had this on the agenda, committee members have had an opportunity to go through it and can make
too many times.
some constructive input and ideas. And this will not be the only time we discuss it. It is extremely complex. It's an older document, goes back to, I believe, John Waterbury and was it George Hoyfelder that put this together probably 12, 15 years ago when Oyster Pond was first being looked at.
Yep.
Ed, can we agree to just discuss functional suggestions and not grammatical ones?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is the first time for this committee, especially the newer members, to look at this document, and we have sent this to the select board with a cover letter that we debated over again, several meetings, asking them to sign on to send a letter to the DEP saying, you folks have to talk to us. We need a dialogue as to how the implementation of all these IAs will be managed by the town or by whomever, but DEP needs to talk to us because we could develop something and they're going to say, well, wait a minute, where's all the stuff we need? And that letter is planned on, I haven't seen the agenda yet, but the select board has committed they will be discussing it at their meeting next week. So with that, Tom, do you want to be the scrolling down guy up there on this one, or?
Sure.
I'm not competent. I hate to keep throwing it at you, but...
you give me the big assignments, you notice.
You can handle it. You've got broad...
Actually, Alan's the closest to the podium right now. We should have
Okay, I think I'm going to kick it off with the first, or item number 2.0. The boundaries will be those defined by the estuary project, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that has happened since this was drafted is the Board of Health has passed a IA mandate for new flow, increased flow, and their areas go beyond the watersheds that are defined here. They use also the drinking water resource areas in their IA mandates. And I think it would behoove the town in a RME to use a consistent definition of what the boundaries are. So I'm suggesting on 2.0 that it be revised to read the defined areas that the Board of Health has, and I don't remember their exact wording, but that would be more appropriate so you don't have conflicting policies and regulations. Anyone else have a comment on that?
Yeah, I have a problem with that.
Okay.
I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I think that the Board of Health has overreached in the areas it's defining, and I find it particularly ironic in light of the fact that a few years ago, the state said to Falmouth, either come up with watershed plans or you'll have to put IAs everywhere. And the town essentially said, oh my gosh, we don't want to have to put IAs everywhere. They're so expensive. We'll do the plans so that we can reduce the number of IAs. And then the Board of Health comes along and says, thou shalt put IAs almost everywhere. I've never completely understood that.
They debated that for probably more than a year. And I know John was previously on the Board of Health. I'm not sure when they started debating that mandate, but I know it's been over a year of deliberations, agonizing over words that I remember a 20-minute discussion trying to define the word unique. in their bylaw. 20 minutes on one word. It's excruciating. And, yeah, I understand your point, Steve, about did they overreach? Possibly, but boy, they worked so damned hard to make this. And their goal was to
Well, what, you're saying if somebody works hard on something,
no,
if they make a mistake,
let me finish. What their goal was in adding the water resource areas is in their role of protecting public health, of which drinking water is a huge part of it. And that's why they did that. And, you know, it was months of talk and discussion, but they did not do that lightly or arbitrarily. That was their definition. And we can talk to the Board of Health, you can talk to the Board of Health about changing that, but I think it would be foolish and indefensible in my mind to have one definition here and another one from another body, a regulatory body rather than an advisory, that is has that discrepancy.
I agree that they should be reconciled, but if we give in by putting their model here, then that becomes the model for the town with no implied no questioning of it, and it makes what Kristen and Amy and GHD are doing look kind of ridiculous, because their plans should all say, well, first of all, the whole watershed that isn't already sewered will have IAs because the Board of Health is requiring it. It changes their numbers totally.
I don't think so. It would increase the number of IAs in the community slightly, maybe significantly, but it won't impact the effectiveness of the RME. And if you did not agree with their boundaries in here and they have a different regulation, how do you reconcile that? So they need to be consistent, and I guess that's the point. Anybody else on that boundary? Go ahead, Ken.
Well, I sort of agree with Steve. I mean, I think we're going through this exercise to define these areas based on load, and which is the whole reason we're doing this, and to then just, you know, expand beyond those areas creates a conflict. And frankly, if I was a homeowner and I was outside our defined loading limit and then mandated to do that, I'd take it to court and say, why are you making me do this?
Well, the Board of Health has that authority, and I think, you know, it's an important point. I don't disagree with that at all, and it needs to be reconciled.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's the
my point is primarily consistency between the RME, because if you don't have that, then, gee, there's some IAs over there in the other area in the water resources, but who's going to regulate those? How is the RME going to say, no, sorry, you're not on our list? I think it's a point that needs to be discussed with the Board of Health. So,
Ed, in the interest of time, I submit that this is a major issue that requires a long time to discuss. There are about 15 sections here. If you round off the time left to half an hour and ignore everything else on the agenda, that means 2 minutes per paragraph.
Right. So let's continue
Can I
on.
just real quickly
Go ahead, Tom.
say something? The whole reason we're doing this is a state mandate to solve our nitrogen problem. The watershed designations, our approaches to this are all controlled by what the state wants us to do. The Board of Health regulation is an in-town operation, so I think philosophically it's important to keep them segregated and not paying attention to the Board of Health regulations in this, because this is something we're doing to meet a state mandate, and the state mandate doesn't. That's my personal spin on things, and I'll stop there because as Steve and others have said.
Okay, good point. Anyone else on the board?
I agree that they should be consistent. I'm not sure I agree that, you know, having the Board of Health do something different than what we're proposing. I think we need to better understand what's driving the Board of Health decision. Because, as you know, Ken has said, you know, we're focusing on reducing nitrogen. They're touching on drinking water quality. Is that what you were saying?
Right. Protection of the resource, which is part of their mandate, a big part of their mandate. So, great point. Let's try to move on.
Okay.
Unless there's something else specific to this one.
I'm putting in a high-speed scroll wheel here now, right?
Okay. 3.0, responsible management entity. That's a huge monster, again, because the suggestion here, or the definition in here, is that it would be a new town department or the DPW or some entity, and whether that entity is town or a contractor like Mastech is to be determined. I think as this is, it's kind of restrictive in throwing it all on the town, but maybe I'm misinterpreting it. Anybody else read this thoroughly and have a thought on that?
Ed, can I?
Yes, please, John. This is your document.
Do you want to come up here?
So I think the rationale here is ultimately the town is going to be responsible for all of these IEAs to DEP. So whether they contract out monitoring and a whole bunch of the stuff, ultimately the town is going to annually have to report to DEP, this is what we've managed to accomplish. So I think that that is perfectly a reasonable thing at this point. And ultimately, that's something that's going to be negotiated between the Department of Public Works and DEP. So my thought here is we've forwarded to the selectmen and ultimately to DEP to comment on a plan to monitor and a plan to report to the state. I can't see our agonizing over the minutia of that until we get a response back from DEP. In other words, if by the end of October we hear nothing, then we should go back and think about those areas and say, you didn't comment on what we were proposing, therefore when we put in our watershed plan, ultimately, here's what's going in it. And at that point, I think we need to look at those sections and modify them to think about them in more detail.
Okay. Alan, go ahead.
It just reminds me, a few weeks ago, you sent, or we asked the select board to send in a letter with regard to this. Has that letter gone out?
No, that's what I mentioned earlier. That is on, I was promised it would be on their agenda for the next meeting next Monday, which is what, the 10th, I believe. So they have the letter, they have this draft document. They also have the other letter we sent to them relative to the development along the Quashnet watershed in Mashpee, but that feeds into quite. So hopefully they will get to those and move that, because we did put a time deadline for response from DEP. And John's spot on. We need DEP to talk to us about this thing, and they have not. I know George Hoyfelder, John, I have reached out to DEP, and the silence is deafening. If we don't get a response, then we've got to get our legislators to start getting involved and say, hey, DEP, you got a reg? How's it going to work? Talk to us. So excellent point, John.
Is it true that the RME could turn out to be the Board of Health?
I think that's for the town to decide, and that's not
right?
It's not. I mean, the board can make a suggestion about how they think that should work, but ultimately, that's the town fathers and the select board are going to have to make a decision of how they would like an RMA.
It could work, definitely. Who it would be, or will it be some third party that is taking on the contractual responsibility and the reporting and all of the other things that are outlined in this? Mastech is an obvious possibility. They're trying to set up a working RME. I don't think they've had any takers yet. They've been in here talking about it. I have asked for a Mastech appearance at a future meeting to, where are they in that process? They haven't responded to that specific. I'm sorry.
You're talking about the Barnstable SUP, the septic utility program that they've talked to us about?
Right.
Taking over this role.
Their version of an RME, which they call a SUP, septic utility program.
I was suggesting that we ignore all these issues of jurisdiction and timing and area. The point of this, I think I now understand, is to come to agreement with DEP on how the management will be done, how much monitoring and when, so we can figure out costs.
And figure out how we're going to implement it.
Yes.
You know, it's going to be tremendous cost regardless of who does it. Unless the state says, oh, DEP is going to come and do it all. Just feed us the data and we'll triage it through a computer program. It can kick out alerts that there's an out of compliance, but who's going to do the sampling, how often? All of those are issues. My goal here is to get the thoughts of this committee on what it would be. We're not going to define it in one meeting or 6 meetings, and be aware of the issues and make the public aware of the issues in this. And also the other town boards. Planning board's meeting the other night, it was incredible how much they're unaware of the impact of their decisions on the septic and nitrogen issues.
That's important.
Yeah.
I think the MassTech's program has been frustrated by the same issues that we're struggling with. They have not been able to get from DEP the critical parameters for monitoring and reporting. So
let's move on and talk about those.
Yeah, can I just say?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
You know, I think as we go through each of these, it would be good to just say, maybe quickly go down the board. Do you agree with what's in here? The beauty of 3.0 to me is it's very simple, it's sufficiently vague that there's flexibility, and it's very clear. There needs to be an entity. Really, that's the key. The thing is, you know, we can put in all these systems. Someone's got to check on them.
Right. Okay, let's move along.
Okay, anybody else have a comment on 3.0? Okay, moving on. 3.1, I think that's a pretty straightforward statement that the property owners are responsible for permitting, design, and grant of access to the municipality and whoever that RME is. And I'm going to think that it makes sense for that possibly to be the installer of the system, the clean to, the ones who design, build, install, and are responsible for the performance. And I think it's pretty straightforward who the responsibility is. The actual entity that does it to be defined. Anyone else have a comment on that, or should we move to number?
Move along.
Just one. Go ahead, Ken. Because I'm going to channel Hilda and Earl for a second and say, because it says advanced IA system, and every time it says that, probably, you guys had a good verbiage for that. It was a nitrogen source separation. Something like that ought to be added in, just in my view.
Okay, go ahead, John.
On 3.1, that may require special state legislation for the ability to go on people's property. I don't believe the town at the moment has the right to do that. So this is an area, as we discuss and see how we're going to make this work, we may have to apply for that special state legislation.
It certainly exists for checking people's water meters, and
that's different.
Yeah.
Well, people do have access. Okay, Earl, you're up there. Go ahead.
Thank you. Earl Barnhart, Green Center. We sent in some comments on this, and we would like to have in the definitions, number 1, SSS, Source Separation Sanitation Systems. And in every one of these 2, 3, 4, whatever, wherever it says Advanced IA, you say Advanced IA or Source Separation Sanitation.
Okay, understand. And, again, this is part of what is the DEP going to do? If source separation technology, whether it's urine diversion or whatever, is effective by the documentation and the history that the DEP requires, then they would most likely define that as that is an IA, because it meets what they want for an IA.
Maybe, but this forces the issue.
Right. This is, the crux of it is, hey, DEP, you got to talk to us. You got to realize the implications of your mandate for all these IAs. And they threw it right at us. I think Steve Layton mentioned it. The law, the regulation they put out is you either do watershed plans or you're going to do 10,000 IAs in Falmouth. There's already 3,000 of these suckers on the Cape, and the fact that they're not being monitored effectively and some of them don't work is part of this problem, too. There's a legacy systems. Okay, 3.2 is an important one because it touches on, I believe, what Hilda and Earl and the Green Center folks have been talking about, load reduction. So it requires an IA to be operating at 10 milligram per liter or less, or 75% removal of total nitrogen, regardless of DE approval of a letter, da-da-da. So if it's approved for 10, but it's not meeting it, but it is able to document 75% removal, that's okay by the Board of Health. Will DEP say, okay, we agree with you, or DEP say, So that's the crux of the problem on that. 3.2 is that mass reduction, 75%. That's not a percent of, or an IA target number. It is a % reduction in load. And they define it in the 2.0, calculating compliance using mass loading calculations. That is in the Board of Health reg that is cited as part of 3.2. Approval of on-site septic systems, 15.39 compliance using mass loading calculations, and how to calculate it is defined in that regulation.
So, Ed, I had a question, because I went to go to the source document for that calculation. So I went to the town website, put in the
got the reg,
and it came out as 15.11 was the requirements for determining, enhanced nitrogen removal. It was in a different number than what's shown on this document, and I don't know if there's an older or younger version out there, but Peter and I were comparing notes, and my version that I pulled up seemed to be younger than what he had, which had a different sub-article for the, it's a minor point, but we might as well make sure we have it right.
Yeah, I mean, what is defined in the latest reg, which I think was just updated this year, and this was just, the new mandates were added to the existing reg, but the existing reg, how do you calculate mass loading? You measure influent total nitrogen concentration, and
it's not the substance, it's just the numbering of.
Well, okay.
So I have it as 15.11 as opposed to whatever it has, 15.3.9.
Okay.
On the document I pulled up. We should just make sure from the bookkeeping, if somebody goes to find that description, that it's going to
they can find it by that number. Okay. Good point. There's a long way to go in this, and I think that's excellent that it's the latest. Using that number, that's what I found, and it tells you how to do it. So the important point here is mass loading is part of the Board of Health regulation, not just a total nitrogen 10 milligram or better, but a 75% reduction. So that's there. I'm going to cut this short so we can at least get through the last couple of things that I think will be quick. We will discuss this again. I'll probably put it on our next agenda, and depending on what else is there, if there's watershed plans to present, we'll factor that in and see if we can get to it. But there's a lot to it. It's a very important document. It's a great starting document. I think there are some tweaks that make sense, not for immediate, because we want to have something to start with DEP, but I think it's important to start looking into, as a committee, what is in this document that has been batted around for a dozen years or so.
Okay, so we're done with this.
Yes, I would say we're done for now, because
so we're stopping at 3.4.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Table the rest of this.
3.3, Ken.
3.3.
We didn't get to 3.3.
Well, we're still on 3.2. through the mass loading thing, and there's a definition, what is the proper code number under the Falmouth regulations that should be cited there.
Doesn't seem like it is.
We don't have minutes for approval, so we'll be able to skip 7. Recent, and I think we have not done members' reports for some time. Any of the liaisons to, Board of Health, Concom, or I don't think we even have anybody at Concom or the Fairness Committee.
Can I make a brief?
Absolutely, go ahead.
I understand that there are now 5 applicants for the 5 positions on the Fairness Committee, which makes the interviewing process very simple. And the Select Board is going to consider that at their meeting on the 17th.
And if I remember correctly, there's a 3-month reporting period. They want the results of the committee's decision within 3 months, I think, of the start of the committee, if I remember the description.
That's a detail.
Yeah.
Let's not waste
It's an ambitious goal.
Well, it's coming up fast.
That's what I mean. It's an ambitious goal. Yeah. Hopefully they'll have a full committee and start having meetings by the end of the month. Anything else, Mr. Layton?
No.
John, anything from Board of Health?
No, there was just one interesting case of a home on Green Pond. They were doing enough work to not trigger the need for an IA, but they're in a future IA district, so they're just putting in a Title V for now, but down the road they realize that they may have to go to an IA once the targeted watershed management plans are accepted by the DEP.
Okay. Tom, anything on shellfish?
Yes. And Maggie's here. I'm only saying this for her benefit, but tomorrow evening, the Citizens for the Protection of Wacoit Bay at their annual meeting is hosting a colloquium, can we call it that? A 3-way discussion, we hope, of Falmouth, Mashpee, and First Light tribal work on aquaculture and different, compare and contrast is the way I'm phrasing it. We're going to look at different goals and success and what's controlling it. And the business meeting starts at 5:30, and this discussion.
Go ahead, Maggie.
Let Maggie come up.
Give us the details. He doesn't know what he's saying.
So Maggie McGaw, Citizens for the Protection of Wacoit Bay. The meeting starts at 5:30 just with refreshments. The program starts at 6. We will try to have an Evelyn Wood speed meeting to cover the typical annual meeting business of electing the board. And I will make a few remarks about the last 12 months and the next 12 months of the organization. And then Tom is going to be our moderator with Chris Avis from Mashpee, Chuck Martinson from Falmouth, and someone, we hope, from the tribe. We have other people also attending. Rachel Hutchinson from the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension is coming, and Chris Avis has said that a woman named Carolyn Larson will also attend with him. So
this is where?
And this is at the
oh yes, so the details. Boathouse at Webner.
Okay.
Starting at 5:30 with the refreshments, ending 7:30 sharp. The program will start at 6 and end at 7:30. Because last year it ran too long.
We know how that goes. Thank you. Anybody else on a liaison basis? Okay. I did mention the Board of Health thing, and I watched that for an hour's worth of it on the on-demand streaming, and it's very interesting, the points that were made by, I said this earlier, but it bears repeating, by both the drinking water superintendent and the Board of Health as to the implications of density increases. So with that, I would also just say, let's see, is there anything? There is also on other environmental actions in the area, Mashpee, freshwater ponds, all the interested entities had a joint meeting that was extremely well attended to talk about their pond health, the freshwater ponds. So, they're being very active. Kim Colmart and the Freshwater Ponds Advisory Group is asking the Select Board to put in a local reg on nitrogen use. The town attorney is recommending against it because it would conflict with an existing state law, but the use of fertilizer in the town, and particularly near freshwater ponds, is a very important issue for all of us, and Kim's committee, the Select Board, is going to be talking about that on, let's see, was it on the August 10th agenda also. The Oyster Pond Culvert Project to replace the culvert that was brought up at a previous meeting by, I think,
Different oyster pond than the one.
Different oyster pond, Falmouth's lucky. We've got a couple of them. And this is the one near Sippawisset Marsh, West Falmouth area. That is a dormant project due to lack of funding, but APCC, Association for the Preservation of Cape Cod, is the stakeholder and the group that's trying to replace that, and they've laid out what their plan is, what they'd like to do. They're gathering data at this point, and we'll continue that into the fall. They hope to do construction at the earliest in 28 or 29, but they don't have any money to do it. But that is a very fresh document I just received today on that environmental action. And lastly, before we adjourn, I received again today, and I don't even want to tell you how many emails I get relative to water quality issues, but the state treasurer, Deborah Goldberg, is asking the legislature to make a revision to the funding, and this ties in with the whole fairness and the availability of funding beyond the Falmouth taxpayer back for IAs in particular. And without reading the whole letter, it is brief, but again, this is something that's been sent to the Select Board just this week, whether they'll get to it at their next meeting or somewhere down the road. But currently, only septic systems that are failed can qualify for this. They want to change the legislation to allow low interest and zero interest loans for people who qualify due to income level to use these loans funded by the state for IA upgrades, not just a failed system. And that would help the IA effort and give them an opportunity that's similar to a sewer mandate for low interest loans. So a lot of stuff going on in this thing. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you all.